There was a time when the stars themselves were not enough for the Eldari. They sought more beauty, more sensation, more ecstasy, more meaning in a galaxy that bent to their whim. Theirs was a civilization of immortal artisans, architects of light and emotion, their souls burning like symphonies in the warp. They built their empire not with blood but with elegance, with the refinement of thought made real, with gods as muses and eternity as canvas. So, before we begin this dark journey together, take a moment to like this video and subscribe if you genuinely enjoy these deep dives into the Star Wars lore. I noticed that about 98.5% of you watching are not subscribe button, and hitting that subscribe button really helps the channel grow and lets me bring you more of these epic tales if you're hungry for even more Star Wars lore and want to explore other corners of this waste galaxy. Definitely check out my channel. Drop a comment letting me know where in the world you're listening from and what time is it there. There's something magical about knowing we're all connected across different time zones, sharing these stories together under the same stars. Now get comfortable. Dim those lights, maybe turn on your fan for that gentle background sound. Wrap yourself in your blanket and let's journey into the shadows of Thew Old Republic together. But eternity is a lie. Now, across the void, something stirs. Something older than time and newer than pain. The stars dim, like candles starved of breath. A cold wind howls where no wind should ever be. Ruins drift, silent and lifeless, through the vacuum. Worlds once sung into being by crystalline choirs, now shattered, ash-colored, and echoing with invisible screams. The galaxy does not forget. The warp does not forgive. And somewhere, in the shadow between those fading lights, we hear it. A whisper, software sweet, the first breath of a god being born. Before we begin the story, know this: we tell it because we care. In this long night of war and ruin, this is a tale not of triumph, but of truth, of the longing for beauty and the price of perfection. We truly love and care for you. So before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now grab your coffee, and let's get started. The high spire of Leithin rose into the heavens like a thorn of glass, shimmering with 1,000 colors that changed with the movements of stars and thought. Upon its apex stood a lone figure, his robes unfurling like ink across marble, his soul stone pulsing with a deep, uncertain light. Prince Illyrian. To mortals he was myth, a poet lord who had sculpted planets into art forms, who had held together the councils of the 12 sectors with a single melody sung into the warp. He was handsome beyond comprehension, his features chiseled by eons of calm reflection and honed desire. But tonight, the stars above him were wrong. He watched them carefully, unmoving, as if straining to hear something beyond them. His psychic senses extended far, through void and veil, through storm and silence. And beneath all things he could feel it, a presence, not just darkness, but hunger. He turned inward, not to meditation, but to memory. There had been a time, not so long ago in the ageless life of an Eldari, when he had believed in the eternal brilliance of his kind, when the harmony of souls, the artistry of life, and the refinement of pleasure had seemed like the purest truth in the galaxy. But over the last 5 solar cycles, his dreams had changed. No longer did he fly across crystalline beaches in reverie, or swim in thoughts composed of flame and light. Instead, he awoke breathless, always with a sound in his ears. Laughter, software velvet, sinister, not his own. In the lower halls of Leithin, the great galleries buzzed with activity. Artists, architects, sensation seekers, and highborn courtiers moved in flows of colour and scent. They danced to choirs of emotion, fed by psychic empaths who wept and laughed in harmonic ecstasy. Entire rooms were constructed of feeling, sadness sculpted in silver, hunger woven into living thread, desire encased in glowing obsidian. None noticed the dulling of the air. None noticed the prince standing in stillness above, his soul stone growing colder by the hour. He had spent the last 50 cycles studying ancient warp anomalies, poring over forbidden data from distant craft worlds. The Harlequins had warned them. The Monkey were blind, yes, but even they felt the tremors. A new force moved in the Empyrean, a swell of psychic pressure, subtle as perfume, deadly as nova fire. And none of them would listen. Perfection is our birthright, the chorus of the Spiral City had told him. We do not fear that which we create. But it was not creation, not anymore. It was obsession, dissolution, entropy disguised as art, and somewhere something fed on it. He returned to his chambers, an impossibly tall oval chamber of floating crystal and anti-gravity silk. A single harp hovered near his bed, strung not with metal, but with threads of his own hair, each one capturing memories from his youth, plucked to hear a forgotten moment. Tonight they were silent. He sat in the center of the floor and reached for his soul. His mind stepped outward, slipping between thoughts, through folds of his consciousness, and into the deeper layers of the warp. It should have been a garden, a cultivated reflection of his inner truth. But the garden had withered. The flowers were still beautiful, yes, but they bled when he touched them. Statues wept thick, scented ichor. The sky above his soul cracked, revealing a second sky beneath it, of teeth and song and lust. And then he heard it again, a whisper, a note impossibly pure, impossibly terrible. Illyrian. It was not a voice in the traditional sense. It was sensation. It was longing given form. It was the sound of being adored by something that had never known love. He pulled away, violently, returned to his body in a breathless surge. The lights in the chamber dimmed, not by design, but as if afraid. He stared at his hands, hands that had painted comets, shaped empires, healed lovers. Were they still his? In the polished wall of his chamber, he caught a reflection. For just a moment, it looked like someone else. The next day, he stood before the Council of the High Crystal in the great harmonic hall, the air thick with symphonic debate. He made his case again. The increasing psychic instability, the warp reflections, the silence from several outlying pleasure worlds. Laughter met him like perfume. One seer gestured idly toward a living sculpture of her own face, weeping eternally. You are afraid of shadows, Illyrian. The only threat to us is stagnation. Fear has no place in our path. But Illyrian saw it. Behind her eyes, behind all of theirs, a flicker, a shimmer, the beginning of a crack in perfection. That night he dreamed again, this time not of whispers, but of birth, a vast shape, half wrapped in silk, half formed of stars and skin, curled in the womb of the warp. It opened its eyes and smiled. He woke to silence and knew somehow in his immortal heart that something had already begun. The empire would not fall in flame, it would fall in song. To walk the pleasure gardens of Zarakinal during the waning age of the Eldari Empire was to stand on the edge of sensation and gaze into the abyss of meaning. Their trees bled gold, and their flowers sang hymns in voices only heard by those trained in harmonic memory. The air shimmered with incense designed to evoke forgotten desires, and the very soil was warm with the pulse of psychic reverie. Every leaf was a note in an endless song, every breath a step deeper into bliss. And yet, for all their beauty, these gardens were not paradise. They were mausoleums of a species that had no word for restraint. Prince Illyrian stepped carefully along the curved bridge of living glass, his hands behind his back, his robes trailing like liquid amethyst. Below him, pools of mirrored memory shimmered, displaying moments from other lives, intimate, joyous, terrible. They were reflections gathered from the minds of visitors, captured and distilled into art for others to consume. He was not here for pleasure, not anymore. A sculpture stood ahead, taller than a wraith lord, cast in light that changed color as one's emotions shifted. It depicted a moment of perfect agony, a union of lovers at the exact instant of death. The crowd gathered around it wept openly, moaned in understanding, some fainting from the resonance of shared feeling. Illyrian watched, unmoved. "Still blind to beauty, my prince?" came a voice, smooth and sharp as a scalpel. He turned to see Master Nithale, artisan of the ninth spiral, stepping from a veil of coloured mist. Her garments whispered temptation with every movement, and her eyes glinted with pride sharpened by genius. "You sculpt what you no longer feel," he said softly. She smiled. "And you feel what you refuse to sculpt. That makes us equals." Illyrian walked past her, toward the centre of the garden, where the air grew warmer, heavier. "There is a weight in the warp," he said, "a silence that is not absence but hunger." She tilted her head. "Always your riddles, Illyrian. Perhaps you should paint again. Bleed the fear from your soul onto canvas." He stopped, turned. "It is not my soul I fear for Nithale. It is yours." For a moment she looked stricken. Then she laughed, light, melodic, cruel. By nightfall, the garden transformed. No longer a sanctuary of art, it became a palace of sensation. The performers took to the amphitheatres carved from sound. Eldari bodies, perfect in symmetry and motion, moved in ritualized dance, their minds linked through psychic nexuses that amplified every breath, every ache, every flicker of lust. Soul empaths wandered through the crowd, gathering the emotional overflow and weaving it into tapestries of color and heat. And at the center, a feast, not of food, but of memory. Eldari, with rare talents, had volunteered to offer their most powerful experiences: first kisses, moments of triumph, the birth of a star child, even deaths, to be psychically shared and devoured. It was sacred and profane, a mass communion of ego and desire. Illyrian stood on the periphery, watching with growing unease. What had once been celebration now felt like incantation, a summoning. He saw it in their eyes, not joy, not truth, a yearning, bottomless, a longing to dissolve completely. One Eldari, draped in silks that writhed with embedded neurofilaments, collapsed beside him. Her face was caught in a frozen smile, eyes wet with tears. "She saw it," murmured one of the attending empaths. "The god of shapes." Illyrian turned. "What did you say?" The empath blinked, confused. "Nothing, my prince. She merely overwhelmed herself. A beautiful moment. She shared her soul, and it burned too brightly." But Illyrian had heard it, not with his ears, but in the warp. A name, not spoken, but felt. The god of shapes, a phrase that had no place in any Eldari tongue. He left the garden, ascending into the high towers, past mirrored halls and starlit balconies, where lovers floated in zero-gravity bliss. He ascended not in body alone, but in mind. reaching again into the immaterium, where emotions took shape and truth flowed unbound by physics. There, he found the garden again. But it was twisted. Where once had bloomed silver flora, now stood monoliths of flesh and bone. The pathways curved not in spirals, but in fractals that led to themselves. Statues moved when unlooked at. Music played from the mouths of headless angels. And at the center, a throne, empty, not from lack, but from anticipation. He approached it, heart racing. The ground beneath him pulsed with breath. A voice came then, slow, sultry, infinite. "Why do you fear what you are, Illyrian?" He froze. "I am not afraid." The voice chuckled. "You are the most afraid. You who watches but will not touch. You who listens but will not sing." He turned. No figure, only shadows that shaped themselves into promise. "You do not belong to them anymore," the voice continued. "You feel the emptiness, the hunger. You know the end is not death, but becoming." His hand trembled. In his mind, he summoned light, but it bent around the throne and vanished. "Who are you?" he whispered. "I am the whisper beneath the harp-string. I am the color never painted. I am the moment before climax and the silence after truth. I am yours." He screamed and woke. The sky outside his tower was weeping violet rain, an atmospheric disturbance shaped by psychic backlash. Weather in the heart of a sealed city was not possible, not natural. He touched his soul stone. It pulsed erratically, as if it too had dreamed. He left his tower and went to the Temple of Echoes, a place of deep silence where only the most ancient thoughts were kept. There, among the stasis-locked vaults of psychic records, he searched for the phrase, "The God of Shapes." Hours passed, then days. He did not eat, he did not sleep, and then a match, an old poem, pre-fall, never spoken aloud. She who thirsts for the curve of desire, who shapes the scream into form, whose kiss unravels the soul, shall rise upon the sighs of a dying people and be crowned not in flame, but in mirrors. Illyrian staggered back from the stasis crystal. His mind raced. This was no madness, no hallucination. It had a name. It had a prophecy. He returned to the garden. It was quiet now, dawn. The sculptures stood still, silent, beautiful. But the air, it was different. He knelt beside the same pool of mirrored memory and placed his hand to its surface. It rippled, then changed. Instead of a visitor's dream, it showed him, himself, standing before a figure of impossible beauty, tall, androgynous, eyes like galaxies collapsing, fingers tracing the shape of his soul, and a mouth moving in a whisper. He couldn't hear it, not yet, but soon, so very soon. And in the warp, far beyond his comprehension, a cradle rocked gently, and something smiled. Eldari soulstones are not merely repositories of memory. They are anchors, tethers between the spirit and the materium, between the luminous threads of the warp and the fragile glass of the mind. They hum with the living resonance of their bearer. They remember, they feel, and sometimes they scream. Prince Illyrian held the cracked soulstone in his palm, its surface spiderwebbed with impossible fractures. Faint psychic echoes radiated from within, pain, desire, confusion. It had belonged to a dream walker named Sirun, a weaver of emotion theatre, found motionless on the violet shores of Leothin, her face frozen in a rapture that was too perfect to be natural. The fracture glowed faintly with colourless light, something deeper than sight. He sat in stillness, listening. At first, there was nothing. Then, Illyrian. He flinched, not a sound, a shape. A voice formed from feeling familiar, intimate, and utterly alien. Why do you resist it? He dropped the soul stone. It thudded softly on the woven psychic silk of his floor and rolled into shadow. He no longer dreamed. The whispers had become too constant. Sleep had become a war zone. The journey to Craftworld Ilithka took him through the Elder Webway, twisting tunnels of folded dimension, shrouded in stasis geometry, and pulsing lights that responded to emotion. Illyrian walked alone, accompanied only by the echo of his own footsteps and the rhythmic beat of his heart, which no longer kept time with peace. Ilithka had been silent for nearly a century. Once a hub of psychic philosophy and resonance art, it now drifted like a sealed reliquary through the void, shrouded in static fields and guarded by wraith knights who no longer responded to external calls. As he emerged onto its outer decks, Illyrian felt it instantly. A difference. Here, the air was thick, not with dust or scent, but with memory. Everything remembered too much. The gates opened for him, not by command, but recognition. The craft world accepted his presence like an old wound accepts the return of a blade. Inside nothing moved. No courtiers, no choir masters, just silence, broken only by the pulsing hearts of wraithbone structures and the quiet hiss of eternity. He found her in the Hall of Shadowed Breath, seated beneath a canopy of null crystals. Farseer Izeravel, exiled, branded heretic by the chorus of high harmony. She was ancient, even by Eldari reckoning, her face as still as death, her eyes like storm-racked oceans. Around her hovered glyphs woven from thought, orbiting her mind like moons of a dying star. "You've come at last," she whispered, as if the moment had already passed. "You know why. I know why you think you've come." He stepped closer. The god of shapes, the warp, pulses with it. She did not answer. Instead, she lifted her hand and motioned toward a shallow pool before her, black as the void. He saw his reflection ripple, then change, not into a demon, not into a monster, but into himself, smiling, with different eyes. "You are becoming what you fear," Ysera said, "because fear is only the mirror of desire." He clenched his fists. "Tell me what it is. Tell me what waits in the warp." Ysera turned her gaze to the stars above, visible through a pane of soul glass that showed not space, but probability. "Once," she said, "the Eldari danced in harmony with their souls. We created art, music, sensation, not to escape ourselves, but to know ourselves. But that changed. Our people began to crave not knowledge, but obliteration. They sought beauty not as reflection, but as consumption." She closed her eyes. "The warp remembers." She led him to a chamber deep within the craft world, sealed for millennia. The air was cold, not in temperature, but in feeling. An absence of emotion, like a room that memory refuses to enter. There, a monument, not to victory, but to warning. It was shaped like a throne, and above it, inscribed in sigils older than speech, were the words, "She, who was never born, waits still." "She has no name," Ysera said. "Not yet, because her name is being written by us." Every scream of joy twisted into indulgence. Every whisper turned to manipulation. Every moment we betray truth for sensation. Carves her deeper into being. Illyrian touched the throne. It was warm. "She is not a demon," he murmured. "She is us. A reflection, yes, and a punishment, but also a birth. You feel it, don't you? In your soul stone." He nodded. "There are others who feel her," Ysera continued. "Artists, seekers, cults. They believe she is the next step, the evolution of our kind into something beyond flesh, beyond morality." "But she is a god of hunger," Illyrian whispered. "She does not create. she consumes. Ysera looked at him, and for the first time, he saw fear in her eyes. Not just us, she said. Everything, all races, all emotion, all perfection. She will drink it until nothing remains but her song. On the return journey, Illyrian did not rest. He sat in the silence of his ship's meditation cradle, soulstone clutched to his chest, eyes closed. He drifted into the warp, not physically, but through thought. He followed the threads of sensation, the whispers, the pulses of feeling that dance between dimensions. And then he saw it, a shape, impossible to describe, yet unforgettable. It moved through the warp like melody through blood, its form shifting with thought, its limbs made of hunger, its face, a mirror, not of him alone, but of everything, of every Eldari who had ever wanted more. It did not attack, it caressed. It sang, not with sound, but with understanding. You have always belonged to me, Illyrian. He awoke screaming, and the soulstone in his palm cracked again. Just a hairline, but deeper. Its voice, once subtle, now echoed. Soon. Back in Lythin, he found the council more fragmented than ever. The artisan guilds now worshipped emotion as divine truth. Sensation cults held public psychic rituals that blurred the lines between dream and reality. The High Choir dismissed him outright. There is no threat, one archseer declared. Only evolution. You speak as the Monkey do, afraid of change. They drown in their filth, Illyrian spat. We drown in beauty. It matters little if the end is the same. In his private chamber, he lit the old runes, wards once used during the war in heaven. He traced them with trembling fingers, his mind stretched thin. He opened the soulstone again. This time, it did not speak. It showed him something. A city of flesh, of music, of screams, of joy sharpened into razors. And at its center, a throne no longer empty. Upon it sat perfection, infinite, terrible, and it smiled. He fell to his knees, breath ragged. It was coming, not with fire, not with armies, but with a kiss, a song, a mirror, and the Eldari would fall willingly. The spiral gardens of Lythin were once a place of quiet reverence. Petals made of thought unfolded in harmony with the seasons of the warp, and psychic butterflies danced across paths woven from color and sound. Eldari would come here to meditate, to compose symphonies from the shifting light, to reflect on the stillness within themselves. Now they pulsed, not with peace, but with fever. The air was thick with perfume, untraceable, without origin, yet none questioned it. The blossoms no longer bloomed in rhythm with the stars. They swelled, obscene and beautiful, dripping with nectar that shimmered like tears. Illyrian walked among them, and every step felt like a betrayal, not of the gods, but of restraint. In the central plaza, a performance was underway. Hundreds gathered in a perfect circle, their minds linked in a shared dream state. At the center, a figure danced, not in silence, but to the psychic resonance of those watching. Her form changed with their thoughts, limbs elongating, eyes multiplying, flesh becoming glass, then velvet, then light. She danced upon the edge of ecstasy and madness, and the crowd wept with joy. They were not worshipping art, they were worshipping surrender. Illyrian broke the circle, his psychic shield repelling the ambient trance. The crowd hissed as their communion was interrupted, some staggering back as though torn from rapture. Her name is Slaanesh, he said aloud, and she already feasts. The performer paused. Her face, impossibly beautiful, turned toward him. You name her too early, she said. She is still becoming. Illyrian narrowed his eyes. Who are you? I am Lyrishel. I was once a daughter of Ulthwé, a spirit singer. Now I am a midwife to a god. She smiled, and the crowd applauded. Later, in the chambers of the spirit chorus, Illyrian stood before the remaining seers and dreamcasters who had not yet fled or fallen. He laid bare what he had seen in Ilithka. The throne, the shape in the warp, the name, Slaanesh. He spoke of the soul stones cracking one by one, and of the dancers like Lyrishel, who now sowed whispers into every breath of Eldari life. Do you not see, he pleaded, she is not a future we choose, she is the future we deserve. A hush followed. Then slow laughter. It came from Illyrian Voss, high dreamwright of the 9th harmonium. You sound like a monkey preacher, he said with mock pity. This god you speak of is merely what we are becoming, what we must become. Illyrian stared, stunned. You believe this is evolution? Not believe, Voss replied. I rejoice in it. For too long, we have denied our supremacy. Why should we not taste every pleasure, explore every nuance of the soul? We are not falling. We are ascending. Illyrian left in silence. The council was lost. Even the oldest among them now trembled with a hunger they no longer recognized as foreign. Slaanesh had not conquered them. She had seduced them. He returned to his chambers and sat before the soulstone once more. Its surface had changed. It no longer reflected his face, but a shifting silhouette. Lips, eyes, curves of flesh, all bleeding into one another, as though the stone itself dreamed. He closed his eyes and entered the trance. He stood in a palace of sensation. Every step upon its mirrored floors sent waves of memory through his bones. His first love, the sting of battle, the birth cry of his sister. Each wall shimmered with images, not of others, but of himself, distorted, perfected, desired. The throne stood before him, occupied. She was beautiful. She was monstrous. She was everything. And when she spoke, it was not with malice, but with affection. You could be more Illyrian, more than fear, more than duty, more than a fading prince clinging to ghosts. Come, let me show you what your soul truly craves. He stepped forward and stopped. No. The word echoed like a blade through silk. Her smile did not fade. You will return. They all do. He awoke gasping. Blood trickled from his nose, and the soulstone shattered in his hand. Its shards no longer whispered. They sang. In the following days, the spiral gardens became a temple. Lyrishel crowned herself the voice of becoming. Her followers painted their faces with warp pigment, and their bodies became canvases of transformation. Old rites were replaced with orgiastic performances of fusion, of body, mind, and sound. Each dance, each sculpture, each psychic exhalation fed something unseen. Every act was an offering, and Slaanesh drank deeply. Illyrian gathered the last resistors, old pathfinders, outcast spirit weavers, scholars who had sealed themselves from the psychic tide. They were few, fractured, desperate. They called themselves the Silent Path. In hidden chambers, they burned ancient wards, recited the names of unmaking, drew on knowledge nearly forgotten, the teachings of Marai Heg, the crone goddess of endings. We must bind our souls, said Illyrian, or they will be consumed. Where will we go? Asked one. He looked to the stars. There are other craft worlds. Some must still stand. We must warn them. We must tell them. The fall has begun. Before they fled, Illyrian stood once more at the edge of the spiral gardens. He saw Lyrishel, now wreathed in veils that flowed like liquid desire, speaking to a gathering thousands strong. She spoke no words. Her thoughts washed over them all like a tide, promising transcendence, sensation, liberation. And as Illyrian turned away, he saw one last horror. Children. Eldari children. Among the crowd, eyes closed, smiling, drinking it in. And in the webway beyond the stars, something stirred. A ripple in the immaterium, a heartbeat. The moment of birth drew near. The perfume descent had begun. It began in silence, not the silence of peace, but the silence of anticipation, thick, choking, suffocating. Across the great void, the webway shuddered, not with motion, but with pressure. Soundless scream growing in the womb of the warp, and then she came, not with trumpets, not with fire, but with a whisper. The eye of terror tore itself into being with a sound that deafened no ears and shattered a million worlds. Planets folded in half. Stars blinked out in fright. Craft worlds screamed, not through mouths, but through the very matter of their being. The fall was not a war. It was a birth. 1,000,000 billion Eldari souls, once gods unto themselves, were ripped from their bodies like petals torn from a dying flower. Whole cities collapsed into themselves, their people frozen in ecstasy, even as their flesh peeled away. For in that moment of death, they knew joy, a perfect, complete joy, and they welcomed it. On the craft world Idarael, one of the few that had turned away from decadence in time, the farces wept as they watched their cousins vanish. Soulstones burst. Spirit circuits overloaded with wails of the dead. The infinity circuit became a tomb. Seal the webway gates, one screamed. Too late. The birth had ruptured every threshold. The old paths, crafted with precision by the old ones, now seethed with warp things. Demons newly born from Eldari sin slithered through the cracks in reality. And at their center, wrapped in glory and gore, floated her. She did not walk. She floated, curled like a babe, then stretched like a cat across galaxies. She had no fixed form, for form was limitation. But if one saw her and lived, they might say this: her skin was made of want, her hair flowed like time, and her eyes, each one showed you the thing you feared most, and the thing you desired more than anything. She did not speak with a voice. She was voice. I am Slaanesh. I am every breath you take in hunger, in lust, in ambition. You made me, and I love you for it. In the ruins of Leothin, where once the spiral gardens bloomed, only smouldering echoes remained. Illyrian returned, walking alone through ash that still shimmered with memory. Statues of glass flesh lay shattered. Temples of sound had been torn apart by psychic storms. But one structure still stood, the throne. It was no longer empty. She was there waiting. Not in her fullness, such form would tear real space apart, but in avataric glamour, a shard of her vast self. Illyrian approached, soulstone dark, mind shielded. You have devoured them, he said. I have welcomed them, she replied. You are not a god. You are a mirror. Her laughter shook the bones of the world. Of course, I am the mirror they chose to kiss. She offered him a hand. Come, I will show you what they saw, what they became. I will give you the perfection they craved. He stepped forward, close, so close, and drew a blade, wrought not of steel, but of soul. Forged from grief, tempered by memory, he plunged it into her heart. She sighed, not in pain, in pleasure. You know nothing of endings, sweet Illyrian. You cannot kill desire. And then she vanished, not slain, merely amused. Illyrian collapsed, the blade crumbled, his essence flickered, but he did not die. He became marked, a survivor of the fall, and worse, a witness. The silent path scattered into the void. They fled to the stars, some to the edge of the galaxy, others into the deepest tunnels of the webway, some to exile in the corners of reality. They carried with them memory, they carried with them loss, and above all, they carried fear, for the Eldari had birthed a god that could never die, a god who did not demand worship, only surrender. And as time warped and centuries passed like breaths, the galaxy named the wound that was born that day, the Eye of Terror, a place where reality and unreality bled together, where stars drowned in madness, where Slaanesh slept with one eye always open, and when mortals reached too far, desired too much, or sang too beautifully. She whispered again, perfection is just one step further. In secret temples on shattered moons cults grew, not just among the Eldari, but among humans, Drukhari, even lost Adeptus Astartes. They wore her sigil, a coil, a kiss, an ever-reaching hand. They whispered her names, the Lady of Excess, the Queen of Pain, the Prince of Pleasure. But only the Eldari remembered her truest title, She Who Thirsts. For every Eldari soul now danced on a knife's edge, and when they died without protection, she would drink them with a smile. So they built soul stones, crafted infinity circuits, bound their afterlives to crystal and code, and yet no safety was certain, for she was always there, just behind the veil, watching, smiling, wanting. And in the heart of the eye where her throne now floated amidst rivers of song and agony, she dreamed, not of conquest, but of invitation. She had no need to invade. All mortals came to her eventually. In the end, it was never about power. It was about love, twisted, true, terrible, the kind of love that breaks stars and builds palaces from the bones of saints, the kind of love only gods know, the kind of love that ends empires. And so the galaxy turned, the Imperium rose, the Eldar dwindled, but Slaanesh remained, waiting, always waiting, for the next soul to cry out, I want more. There is a place beneath shadows, a city not built but flayed into being, where time has no shape and cruelty has no measure, where screams echo not in agony, but in art. It is the last haven of a dead people who refuse to die. It is Commorragh, the Dark City. After the fall, the Eldari scattered. Some ran to the craft worlds, seeking discipline. Others took to the Exodite worlds, hiding in nature's purity. But some stayed. They did not repent. They did not change. They perfected what damned them. These were the ones who turned their backs on soulstones and self-denial. They chose instead to thrive in the shadows of She Who Thirsts, not in worship, but in defiance. And from their madness and mastery, Commorragh bloomed, a labyrinth of pain and wonder carved deep within the hidden veins of the webway, a city where sunlight never touched, and every heartbeat was stolen. It was not one city. It was a million spires, each taller than possibility, each ruled by archons, sybarites, witch cults, and cabals whose names were curses. Time bent there. A second might stretch into a decade of torment or collapse into a moment of ecstasy. And above it all, the dark muse danced. Slaanesh, not present, but always near, a scent on the air, a whisper behind silk walls, a thirst that could never be sated. The Drukhari did not pray. They spat upon the gods, but they feared her all the same, for they knew the price of their defiance. The fall had shattered them, but they refused to vanish. They discovered a truth, that pain could delay the end. Agony, inflicted upon others, became a balm. Each scream offered, each nerve flayed, each captive broken, bought them one more day. As Drubel Vecht understood this better than anyone, he rose from nothing, a gutter-born wraith in a city of monsters. He saw the ancient cabals rot under their own indulgence, and he tore them down, one by one, through poison, through whispers, through spectacle, until the cabal of the Black Heart ruled the Dark City. Vecht did not love Slaanesh, but he did understand her. He built temples of horror and galleries of despair, not in reverence, but in mastery. Each pain harvested from the living became currency. Each soul twisted became fuel. Each rebellion crushed became performance. He made the entire city a stage, and Komorrah danced on it, a pirouette of cruelty against the edge of oblivion. Yet even here, beneath the webway's deepest folds, the thirst never stopped. Drukhari, who did not feed, withered. Their souls eroded, until the Prince of Pleasure drank them from within, their bones collapsing like empty cages. So they fed. They had to. On slaves, on dreams, on each other. It was not evil, it was survival. Among the witch cults, it became a form of worship, masked as theatre. Arena lights blazed violet. Crowds howled from balconies made of bone and iron. And gladiators, beautiful, lethal, performed violence with elegance unmatched. Each kill was exquisite. Each death, art. They called it the rite of grief, a symphony of blades and blood that echoed into the warp like prayer. But no god answered, not even her. And yet, sometimes, during the final scream, the mask would crack, the arena would fall silent for a moment too long, and the victorious witch would tremble, not with triumph, but with presence, a breath on the neck, a laugh that echoed from within. She was there, watching, drinking, loving. Some Drukhari broke in those moments. They fell to their knees, tore their own faces off, or began to smile, and never stopped. These became the hushed, slaves to pleasure, but not of their own making. There were rumors that Vecht had found a way to shield the Dark City. Some claim he bargained with the Harlequins, traded secrets with the Laughing God. Others whispered he found a shard of the old Empire's soul, caged it in iron, and fed it to Slaanesh to buy silence. But the truth was simpler. There is no shield, only delay, only performance. Komorrah is a wound wrapped in silk. It glitters, it dazzles. But beneath the veil, it rots. Every act of cruelty is a breath stolen from the grave. Every scream offered is a bribe to eternity. But even the richest well runs dry. And Slaanesh waits, patient, playful, hungry. There is a saying among the Drukhari, she does not come when you scream, she comes when you stop. And so they never stop. The city spins, its lights never dim, its arenas never close. Pain becomes rhythm, torture becomes tradition, death becomes dance, and the dancers forget why they began. Only that if they cease, the dark behind the veil will open, and they will be taken. On the outskirts of Komorrah, there is a statue. No one claims to have made it. It is not guarded, not marked. A figure neither man nor woman, neither cruel nor kind. Its face is cracked. Its eyes are mirrors. Some say if you stare long enough, you see yourself smiling. Others say if you listen, you hear your name whispered, not in warning, in invitation. The statue never moves, but its shadow grows. In the void between stars, there exists no silence, only the low hum of ancient sins reverberating through time. There, amidst the cold ruins of lost empires, glides a solitary figure, a dancer without audience, a killer without mercy, a mirror without flaw. She is Lilith Hesperax, the blade without equal. Born in the screaming pits of Comorra, Lilith was not raised. She was sharpened. Her cradle was an arena. Her lullaby, the screams of butchered champions. She was not nurtured by love. She was sculpted by violence. By the time she could walk, she had already killed. By the time she could speak, her words were threats veiled in poetry. And by the time she entered the arena, she did not fight. She performed. To Lilith, battle was not conflict, it was choreography. The blade was not a weapon, it was a partner. She danced through carnage with a grace that mocked gravity. Each movement was measured, each step deliberate. She never wore armor, she did not need it. Her skill was her shield, her beauty, her bait. She lured foes with elegance, then killed them in ways that made even the crowd fall silent. Not from horror, but from awe. There are no records of Lilith's rise, only scars in the flesh of survivors. Each cult she joined was elevated, then devoured. Each rival she faced vanished. Some say she killed them. Others say she broke them so thoroughly, they now worship her in silence. She became the Queen of Blades, not by title, but by truth. There was no one better, not in Comorra, not in the webway, not in the galaxy. But perfection is not a state, it is a curse, for in a galaxy ruled by gods, those who near perfection draw attention. Lith never spoke of the whispers, but they followed her, after each flawless duel, after each massacre that left her untouched and unsplattered. She began to hear the laugh, not a cruel laugh, a delighted one. She was not being mocked, she was being admired. In mirrors, she began to see not herself, but another, not always, just in the edge of the reflection, a figure behind her shoulder, lips parted in praise, eyes wide with need. It was not fear that gripped Lilith. It was something worse. Recognition. She understood that look. She had seen it on the faces of the crowd. It was adoration, obsession, hunger. But never had it come from something eternal. One night, she vanished. The arenas whispered, the cabal speculated. Some claimed she had fallen, that her perfection had finally betrayed her. Others believed she had ascended, that she now walked the realms of the gods. But the truth lies elsewhere. In a chamber deep beneath the shadow spires of Comorra, far beyond the reach of mortal access, lies a single room. It holds no guards, no doors, just a single pedestal and a single mirror. Those who gaze into it do not see themselves. They see her, Lilith, dancing, slaying, twisting in forms impossible. The dance continues forever, never tiring, never slowing. It is said that this is not a recording, but a prison. For you see, Lilith never made a bargain. She never bent knee, never uttered a prayer. She never even acknowledged the Prince of Pleasure. She simply was, perfect. And that was enough. Slaanesh does not need consent. It needs only desire. And Lilith, in her every breath, radiated it. She killed for beauty. She danced for admiration. She fed not on souls, but on applause. and the dark muse, ever hungering for sensations, found in her not a servant, but a reflection. They say Slaanesh did not take her by force, but by invitation, not Lilith's, its own. It opened the door, a mirror of silk and gold, and when Lilith stepped through, curious, prideful, unafraid, she did not vanish. She became part of it, a gem in the crown, a ripple in the endless pleasure sea of the warp. But in that final moment, she smiled, not in fear, but in triumph. For what greater audience could she ask for? What stage could compare to the soul of a god? She had slain mortals for centuries. Now she would dance before eternity. To this day, Drukhari whisper her name with reverence and terror, not because she was the best, but because she proved something they all feared, that perfection is not salvation. It is invitation. Sometimes, during grand executions in the arena, a strange thing happens. A blade slips, a movement missteps, a scream carries not agony, but joy, and the crowd pauses, because they know, deep in their hollowed chests, that the dance has begun again, just for a moment. She has returned. And in the mirror at the arena's edge, where no reflection should be cast, a figure in shadow pirouettes, her blades drip with light, her smile, terrible and perfect, never fades. She is watching, and Slaanesh watches through her, because in the end, there is no difference. They are the same dance, two sides of the same mirrored blade, one lost in the fall, the other, the fall itself, in the bowels of Komara, where the light of stars dares not touch and reality bends under the pressure of ancient cruelty. There exists a symphony, not of sound, but of suffering, a choir of agony so pure it becomes beautiful. At its center stands Urian Rakarth, homunculus, master of flesh, priest of pain. He's not a man, not anymore, if ever he was. Time means little to him, age even less, for Urian is a being rewritten by his own hand. Each sinew, each organ, each nerve deliberately sculpted to refine the sensation of torment, not to avoid pain, but to perfect it. His laboratory is not a place. It is a belief, a maze of bone and steel stitched together by the screams of millennia. It breathes, it hungers, it remembers. Those who enter are not merely dissected, they are translated into language, into art. For Rakarth does not kill for necessity, he kills to compose. It is said he once captured a Phoenix Lord, held the ancient Eldari warrior still as he unraveled his soul thread by thread, not to destroy it, but to listen. The Phoenix Lord did not scream, he sang. Urian believed agony was the truest music, and that through it one might pierce the veil of divinity. In every nerve ending, every severed tongue, he sought a rhythm, a pattern, a divine note. And when he found it, he did not speak. He laughed, a high, shrill sound that shook the webway's darkened halls. The homunculi of Komara, twisted as they are, whispered behind their masks, not because they feared him, but because they suspected the truth. Urian had begun to hear something back. For what else could explain his visions, his refusal to die? He had been slain dozens of times by rivals, accidents, even demons. Yet always he returned, stitched together with new limbs, new eyes, new perspectives. He claimed he had found a secret, a pain so precise, so eternal, that it became immortality, and when asked where he had learned such knowledge, he simply touched his tongue to the air, as if tasting some distant perfume, and said, "It taught me." They say Urien had created a sculpture so profound that it wept, not tears, but other things, sounds that bent the ears of gods, flesh that folded into impossible geometries, a creation that hungered for itself. Those who saw it clawed their own eyes free, not in horror, but to preserve the memory of its shape before it changed again. And in the quiet that followed, Urien wept, not from sorrow, from joy, because in that moment he felt something he had not felt in thousands of years, the touch of Slaanesh. Not a hand, not a whisper, a sensation, a vibration that moved through his spine like molten silk. It was not possession, it was communion. Urien had not worshipped, he had amused, and Slaanesh, eternal, sensuous, mad, had watched his work and smiled. Others would have been damned. Urien was invited, but he did not enter the warp. He brought it closer. With each new experiment, each masterpiece of pain, he tuned reality, made it thinner, more pliable. Komora darkened. Its shadow stretched longer. Its walls began to breathe. Some believed Urien was becoming a god. Others believed he already was, but didn't care to tell anyone. He had no desire for temples, no need for sermons. He only needed his tools and his choir. One of his disciples, Felok Vix, once asked what it all meant. The screams, the sculptures, the endless rituals. Urien, busy threading a heartbeat into a loop of crystal nerves, paused and said, "Meaning is a thing for mortals. I seek taste, the flavor of agony when it's ripe, the sound of beauty when it breaks, the soul mid-shatter. That is my cathedral." Then he returned to his work, and Vic screamed for 7 days, not because he was punished, but because he understood. In the webway, portals began to hum when he passed. His very presence disturbed reality. Glass melted, mirrors whispered, time staggered, and the shadows behind him walked half a step out of sync. He once bottled a scream so perfect, so eternal, that it drew demons like moths to flame. They did not attack, they knelt, they begged to hear it again, and Urien, with a smile that had no lips, granted their wish. It is unknown if Rakarth truly served Slaanesh. He would deny it, mock it, dissect the very idea of service. But deep within his vaults lies a single cell, not locked, but singing. Inside it is a mirror of flesh, not glass, that shows the viewer not themselves, but what they would look like if Slaanesh had sculpted them, and always, always, they are smiling. That is the true terror of Urien Rakarth, not that he worships the Dark Prince, but that he is, in truth, one of its echoes. Where others fall by seduction, he seduced back. Where others are devoured, he fed it. And somewhere, in a throne carved from the cries of perfection, Slaanesh shivers not in pleasure, but in anticipation. For even gods are not immune to curiosity, and Urien Rakarth, the architect of agony, may yet teach Slaanesh itself a new sensation, a pain it has never felt before. And if that day comes, the galaxy will not scream, it will sing, long before the fall, before the empire of the Eldari shattered under its own rot. There was a city known as Isharian, the banquet world, a place of eternal revelry where hunger was outlawed and excess was enshrined. Isharian did not sleep, it danced. through violet meadows of intoxicants, across glass bridges that played music with each step, amid golden towers that shimmered with the color of wine and longing. It was not a world, it was a performance, and his people did not live, they feasted. Every moment was an art, every breath curated. Even sadness was fashionable, stylized melancholy performed in gardens of weeping statues and songs composed to induce graceful despair. Birthdays were declared national holidays. Deaths were mourned with orgies of memory. Pain was not suffered, it was designed. The noble houses of Isharian competed not for power, but for aesthetic purity. Who could weep the most beautifully? Who could suffer best in silk? Their souls frayed from indulgence, but they did not see it, because no one in Isharian looked backward, only inward, only deeper. They dined on suns, bathed in sound, drank chemicals that erased the memory of guilt. Their poets grew silent, their scientists turned to perfume, their warriors choreographed duels that killed no one, but made everyone cry. And atop this hollow stage stood the House of Wavar, the first house, keepers of the eternal banquet. They were perfection embodied. Clad in armor grown from living glass, they did not walk, they glided. Their words fell like perfume on the air. They were not rulers, they were hosts. The matriarch of Wavar, Silandri the sable-lipped, was known across the webway, not for conquest, but for her voice. It was said her laughter could still the warp, that she had once wept so beautifully, a tyrant of the segmentum obscurus surrendered unbidden. When she sang, the stars blinked to listen. She did not pray, she performed. To what? None dared ask. But deep in the chambers beneath her palace, there stood a mirror, 9 meters tall, black as void, wrapped in chains that bled perfume. She called it her guest, and she fed it. Halekin. Not food, not blood, but experiences. She would bring her finest dancers to collapse before it, her most perfect lovers to scream in ecstasy near its surface. And once, only once, she brought a child, newborn, unbroken. She did not kill it. She simply held it to the mirror, and the mirror breathed. House Wavar believed themselves beyond morality, beyond the crude binaries of good and evil. They had transcended such shackles. They were taste incarnate, narration. But not all agreed. A rebel poet exiled from the Sapphire District carved the truth into the walls of the pleasure crypts. The banquet feeds a guest we do not see, and when it rises from its chair, we shall be the meal. The words were painted over. The poet was dissolved in song, but some remembered. One of them was Caris Talve, a humble servant in the house kitchens, born blind, mute from birth. But his mind was clear, and he had seen the mirror, not with eyes, with instinct. He felt its pull, its hunger. He watched as guests returned from its chamber, emptier, their skin still radiant, their smile still perfect. But something had been taken. A layer, a whisper, a soul note, and he began to suspect the banquet was not a celebration. It was a sacrifice. For what is pleasure, if not the ripening of flesh? What is art, if not the sugar before the slaughter? And what is Slaanesh, if not the guest, long invited in? Silandri, in her growing madness, declared a new festival, the devouring performance. 100 days, 100 deaths, one final performance for the guest behind the mirror. The entire city would become the stage, and House Wavar would be the offering. Some wept, others cheered, but none left, because there was nothing outside the banquet, nothing but reality, and that was a sin too bitter to taste. Caris tried to flee, not to escape but to warn. He painted the truth in blood across the sky balconies. He whispered to birds made of dreamlight, but no one heard, because no one listens to servants, and no one listens to truth when it ruins the decor. On the final night of the banquet, Selandri stood before the mirror, wreathed in perfumes older than light, adorned in a crown of coiling tongues. She sang, not a song of joy, not of despair, but of invitation. And the mirror, at last, opened. It did not shatter. It folded. Reality peeled like silk, and through it came not a god, but a sigh, a wave of hunger, a breeze of bliss so sharp it split bone like petals. Slaanesh did not walk through. Slaanesh did not need to. It simply was. And the city, perfect, hollow, ripe, collapsed into rapture. They wept, they screamed, they praised, and they died. Not in pain, in pleasure so infinite it erased identity. Caris stood in the kitchens, blind and mute, as the wave reached him. He did not flee. He bowed, because he understood. This was always the destination. The banquet was never for them. It was for it. And as Isharian was consumed, its towers singing, its meadows melting, its glass turning to breath, Selandri laughed. Even as her soul was peeled like fruit, she laughed. The guest is pleased. And so was born a shard of she who thirsts, not in battle, not in slaughter, but in applause. In the deep reaches of the webway, beyond even the reach of craft worlds drifting in slow, pained exile, there is a place known only in old prayers, and the fearful murmurs of harlequins who forget to laugh. It is not marked on any star map, not etched into runes or sung in the circles of Vaul, but it exists. The Hall of the Hollowed Eyes, a sanctum, a tomb of revelation. Here, in silence deeper than the void, the Eldari once came, not to dance, not to hunt, not to lust, but to remember, for it was the last place their kind had wept without beauty. Before the fall, before Slaanesh, before decadence had become religion, there had been shame, and those who still carried it built this place to preserve it, to ensure not all memory rotted into perfume. The hall was vast, not in width, not in grandeur, but in depth, 1,000 steps down, each one carved by a different hand, each stone laid with a sin too painful to speak aloud. They say even the Inari will not walk its full descent. They say the exarchs bow at its threshold, and they say that once, long ago, a soul tried to clean it. The floor bled. The hall has no walls, only mirrors, but not mirrors of light, mirrors of soul, reflections that do not show your form, but what you once were. And if you stare too long, you see not just yourself, but every path you could have walked, the lives you refused in favor of pleasure, the kin you forsook for the sake of indulgence, the truth you silenced for the art of lies. It is said that when the Phoenix Lords pass through, they bleed through their armor. Even they, ancient as they are, cannot bear to look into their reflection before the fall. There are statues in the hall, but not sculpted from marble or wraithbone. They are Eldari, preserved by choice. Those who came here seeking penance and found only truth. So they let their souls be drained, let their eyes hollow, Let the mirrors devour what remained. They are still alive, but they do not move. They are memory given form, willing relics. One of them is named Alainai, or was. Once a soul singer of the crystal choirs of the core worlds, she sang a single note so perfect, it caused 1,000 Eldari to dissolve in orgasmic bliss. She believed it was transcendence, until she came here and saw what she had taken. Now, her mouth is open, forever, but no sound comes. Her voice was burned clean by the truth. Another is Iriath, daughter of silence, once a matron of 100 hedonist cults. She pierced her own heart before the mirror, but the mirror would not let her die. She had to see herself, forever. And in the deepest chamber, beneath the final step, past all thought and all breath, there is no mirror, only a void. It is said this is where Slaanesh looked first, not in hatred, not in conquest, but in recognition. For this chamber was not made to resist it. It was made to receive it, to acknowledge the truth, that Slaanesh was not born from madness, but from honesty. The Eldari had always been vain, beautiful, proud, but once, long, long ago, they were also afraid, and fear makes monuments, not to gods, but to consequences. This hall is not a denial. It is a shrine to what they knew was coming. That they would fall, that their empire would drown in silk, that their children would one day sing the apocalypse into being. One harlequin once entered the hall, wreathed in motley, a trickster of stars. He danced through the mirrors, laughed at every reflection, mocked each statue, until he reached the final chamber. And he stopped laughing, and he never left. His mask still rests on the ground, and his soul, no one knows, but they say the laughing god himself weeps when he speaks of that place. Some craft-worlders claim it's myth, that the hall never existed, that it is metaphor, a warning. But then why did the seers dream of it? Why did the children of Biltan draw its mirrors in their sleep? Why does every farseer flinch when asked what lies beneath the webway's blackest root? Because some truths live, and some truths remember us, and some truths wait. Slaanesh does not fear the hall, it cherishes it, because it knows the truth too. The Eldari didn't birth Slaanesh by accident. They summoned it, with every choice, every feast, every touch that sought to fill a soul-sized hole with sensation. They called her, and the hall of the hollowed eyes. It was the first place that whispered, "She is coming." And so it waits, silent, unlit, a memory waiting to be remembered. A wound refusing to heal, because not all sins end in death. Some echo, forever. It began with silence, not the silence of peace, not the stillness of meditation, but the kind of silence that presses against the eardrums like pressure from the deep, a silence that hides a scream. The blind oracle sat at the heart of the sapphire spires of Kelvornesh, a domed palace woven from crystal nerves and psychic gold, hovering above the soul sea of an ancient pleasure world. She had no name, only titles: the Whisper Eater, the mouth of the unseen future, the one who swallowed her eyes, Bardin. Long before the fall, when the Eldari were still gorging on the marrow of their own civilization, the oracle had seen something. In a moment of cruel clarity, her sight pierced the veil of decadence and glimpsed the shape of what would be born from their gluttony, a god unborn, yet already weeping, a name not yet spoken, but already echoing in the walls of time. And in that moment, she reached up and tore her eyes from her skull. But blindness could not save her, because the future, once seen, does not forget the seer. The nobles of Slaanesh turned her into a pet oracle. A curiosity passed from cult to cult, their minds convinced that if she was mad, then her visions could be dismissed. They fed her perfumes, bathed her in the blood of slaves, made her breathe the dreams of entire city blocks, all so they could ask her questions they never wanted answered. What colour shall I wear for the hunt of crystal echoes? When will my lover die? Will I win the duel of glass and bone? Am I beautiful enough for the god of pain to notice me? Each question brought a whisper, not words but impressions, smells, sounds, shivers up the spine, and from these fragments her captors wove prophecies, lies mostly, but some truths did escape, and those drove entire districts to suicide. One day, when the stars above Slaanesh aligned in perfect symmetry, the cult of the violet bloom prepared a feast in her honor, not out of reverence, but out of amusement. They dressed her in a shroud of wet silk, painted her face with crushed soul pollen, hung incense made from the ashes of forgotten crone worlders. Then they placed her in the center of a banquet, where every guest was required to feed her a question, not food, not wine, but questions. And so the blind oracle sat, bound in threads of psychic glass, while the richest Eldari of the inner core offered her inquiries dipped in vice. One by one, they approached. When will my mask crack? What do the stars taste like? If I murder my twin, will I feel more alone or less? Each question was a meal, and she swallowed them whole, not with her mouth, but with the hollow sockets of her face. The room pulsed with reverie. But as the feast wore on, the air began to thicken. The guests felt uneasy, not from fear, but from remembrance. And because the oracle had stopped whispering impressions, now she spoke names, real names, forgotten names. Aurelin Vash, whose hands held joy before they held knives. Dralian, who once wept when his sister died, before he devoured her soul to preserve her flavor. Kelianthra, who saw beauty in birth before she bred pain for pleasure. Each name was a knife, each truth a scar. The oracle was not answering their questions anymore. She was feeding them their own forgotten guilt. And the palace trembled. The mirrors along the feasting hall cracked. The crystalline floor bled liquid light. The laughter died in the throats of the elite, because the blind oracle had spoken a final name. She who thirsts. And the lights went out, not because the power failed, but because the stars closed their eyes. In the dark, something stirred. Not a god, not yet, but the breath of one. Each guest felt it differently. To some, it was the taste of honeyed ash. To others, the sensation of being kissed behind the eyes. To a few, it was the memory of a sin they had loved too deeply to forget. They fell to their knees. Some wept, some moaned, some tore at their own flesh, just to feel the pain of guilt again. And at the center of the chaos sat the blind oracle. Her bindings burned away. Her skin cracked, not from age, but from the pressure of knowing. She stood, slowly, and where her feet touched the glass, it turned to salt. She did not run. She did not scream. She simply walked through the crowd as they tore themselves apart in ecstasy, horror, and revelation. For they had glimpsed a future through her eyes, A future not of possibility, but of certainty. The birth of their desire. The end of their empire. A scream wrapped in velvet. A kiss that drowns the soul. Later, when the cultists came to see what had happened, they found the feast hall in ruin. 100 nobles lay dead or mad, some smiling, some broken, one still dancing with no legs, and in the center of the room, the blind oracle's shroud remained, folded, clean, untouched by blood or fire. But she was gone. Some say she walked still, a spirit of penance wrapped in bone-white cloth, seeking children not yet broken by pleasure, to warn them before it is too late. Others say Slaanesh devoured her in that moment, not out of hunger, but out of affection. For the oracle did not resist the god's coming, she simply acknowledged it. And in that acknowledgement became part of the scream. It began, as all heresies do, with music, not a battle hymn, not the triumphant chorus of Eldar war masks, not even the keening soul songs of mourning. This was different, quieter, more intimate, like a lullaby whispered from inside the flesh. The Eldari were artisans of sensation. They crafted melodies as others shaped blades, delicate, deadly, and precise. Entire symphonies were composed for the opening of a single eye. Operas dedicated to the act of exhaling. Choirs trained to simulate the sound of silence. But in the final centuries of their empire, a new kind of music emerged. One that had no composer. One that no songwriter dared claim. They called it the song beneath the skin, and no one remembered where they first heard it. It came like a fever, a hum in the bones, a rhythm behind every heartbeat. Some heard it while painting, some during intimacy, others while meditating in the crystal gardens of their kin worlds. But once heard, it was never unheard. The song had no notes. It did not echo in the air. It lived inside you, in the gaps between nerves, in the breath between sobs. At first, the Eldari embraced it. They were, after all, seekers of experience. The elite of the Ulthanashi culture believed the song was a gift, a deeper connection to the universe. They formed skin choirs, bodies stitched together with threads of nerve hair, so they could feel the harmony pulsing across shared flesh. They created blood orchestras, where each instrument was a wound, and the performance was timed to the rhythm of bleeding. They sculpted symphonies from the last words of dying lovers, recording each gasp and tremor into psionic amber. But the song grew. It began to change them. Not visibly, not at first. No mutations, no marks, just subtle shifts. A dancer no longer moved to the audience's breath, but to a rhythm no one else could hear. A sculptor found their statues weeping when no one watched. A poet's verses drove listeners to claw open their chests in awe. The song asked for more, not in words, but in desire, and the Eldari, ever eager, obeyed. There were whispers of a cult, not of gods, not yet, but of sensation. They called themselves the cantors of the vein, and they did not sing with their mouths, they sang with their skin. They believed that each nerve ending was a sacred string, that true music was pain, measured and played with purpose. To them, agony was harmony, each scream a note, each scar a verse. They sought no audience, for the song they followed was already listening. In a deep chamber beneath the gemstone city of Veluthari, they built the Choir of Thorns. It was not a temple. It was not even a hall. It was a body, a living organism made from fused Eldari, hundreds, bound together by flesh and longing. Their veins pulsed in unison. Their lungs breathed as one. And from their countless mouths came not words, but a low, ceaseless hum, a lullaby for a god that was not yet born. The Farshas tried to intervene. They had seen echoes of the doom to come. Not clearly, not yet, but enough to be afraid. They cast soul wards and sang bans against the melody. They burned entire city sectors to purge the cantors. But it was too late. The song had spread, not as sound, but as hunger. A hunger to feel, a hunger to know every frequency of ecstasy and pain, a hunger to be more than merely alive. The Farshas named it spirit flux and declared it a plague of the warp. They sealed entire planets behind psychic veils, hoping to suffocate the music, but every seal was a drumskin, every prison a resonance chamber, and the song adapted. It sang in colors, it whispered through perfumes, it danced in the tremors of pleasure, until even those who resisted found themselves tapping a finger to a beat they could not place. And still, no one said the name. Still, no one dared speak of she who thirsts. But she was listening. She was always listening. One by one, the cantors disappeared. Not vanished, but ascended. Their bodies no longer bound by flesh. They became sound. Their essence dissolved into the warp, becoming part of the symphony eternal. Those who remained tried to resist. They stitched their ears closed. They ripped their tongues out. They carved runes of silence into their bones. But the song was never heard with ears. It was felt, in the marrow, in the soul, and no ward could keep it out. It ended as quietly as it began, not with war, not with fire, but with a single note, Augusfire minim. One day, across 1,000 worlds, in a moment of perfect stillness, every Eldari who had ever heard the song looked up and smiled. And in the warp, a new harmony stirred. It was not yet Slaanesh, not fully, but it was no longer a whisper. It was a promise. That perfection was not in restraint, but in abandonment. That music was not in order, but in desire. That the most sacred sound was the scream that came when you tore yourself open and became something more. And so the song continued, long after its singers were gone, carried by wind, by memory, by want, waiting for new voices to join the chorus. Before the fall, before the ruin, before the cry that shattered the stars, there was a garden, and in its center, a mirror. It was not made of glass, nor crystal, nor silver. It was made of memory, a construct of psychic resonance, woven from the threads of 1,000 Eldari minds, the finest artisans, the most disciplined seers, the most devoted soul weavers. They called it Isha's mercy, a place for reflection, a place to see the self without veil or vanity. But in time, even mercy becomes a weapon, and reflection becomes obsession. Or it was built at the heart of a world called Lyrianth, a quiet planet of temples and songbowers, far from the decadent spires of the core worlds. The mirror was not meant for the many. Only a few were permitted to stand before it. Those seeking forgiveness, those haunted by visions, those who feared they had begun to hear the song beneath the skin. It showed you your soul, naked, unveiled, without illusion or artifice. Most wept. Some went mad, but a few smiled. They were the dangerous ones, the ones who saw not horror but beauty in their reflections unraveling. One such soul was Cyrillin Val, a priestess of the Sensei cult devoted to sensation as sacrament, who had once composed an entire ballet performed solely through the act of burning flesh. She came to Lyrianth weeping, claiming visions, claiming fear. But when she stood before Isha's mercy, she did not weep. She laughed. What Cyrillin saw was not herself alone, but 1,000 versions of herself, each more glorious, more free, more perfect than the last. One with wings of flame, one with a mouth that sang through every pore, one that danced through dimensions naked and bleeding joy, and one at the center who turned to look at her and winked. From that moment on, Cyrillin Val was changed. She began to whisper to the mirror, not prayers, but questions. What must I become? What do you desire of me? How do I sing the truth? And the mirror answered, not in words, but in visions. She returned to her home world and formed the cult of the Gilded Self, a movement that taught that the soul was clay, and the gods demanded we sculpt ourselves anew, that each sensation was a chisel, each act of beauty or horror a hammer strike on the unfinished statue of what we might become. They abandoned traditional names. They took titles instead. Refractions, they called themselves. Refraction of joy, refraction of ecstasy, refraction of the ever-mouth, refraction of blood-spun glass. Cyrillin was not their leader. She was their first mirror. Lyrianth was soon overrun with pilgrims, not of faith, but of flesh. They came not to repent, but to be seen. They bathed in psychic oils. They performed ritual mutilations under starlight. They screamed their names into the wind so that the echoes might be caught in the mirror's surface. And the mirror grew, not in size, but in depth. Seers began to report anomalies. The reflection showed not only the viewer, but other things. Eyes behind eyes. Smiles that didn't belong. Shadows shaped like twisted gods. The Farseers panicked. They sent a delegation to seal the artifact, to banish its resonance into the webway. But Cyrillin was waiting. She greeted them not with war, but with welcome. She invited them to look, just once, to see what their soul might yet become. Only one refused. The rest, they remained. Some flayed themselves. Some fused their minds into the mirror's frame. One became a song of glass and teeth, forever humming on the wind. And Isha's mercy became something else. No longer a place of healing, but a gateway, a mouth. A mirror that no longer reflected what was, but what might be, if only you surrendered enough of yourself. They say Cyrillin entered the mirror one final time, not to view herself, but to meet the one who had always been watching. What she saw, no mind could endure. What she became, no body could contain. And yet, she returned, changed. Golden-veined, eyes like dripping starlight, voice a perfect harmony of hunger and delight. From her lips came a prophecy. The hourglass has cracked. The dreamer is stirring. The mirror is no longer content to reflect. It wants to be seen. The cult of the Gilded Self became an epidemic. They began seeding mirrors across the webway, each one tuned to the same resonance, each one echoing the hunger of the original. Not just glass, but songs, stories, even emotions became mirrors. Anything that allowed the soul to see itself became a doorway. And behind every doorway, a whisper, not yet a name, not yet a god, but soon. The Farseers convened in desperation. They sent silences to shatter the original mirror. They burned Lyrianth to its bones. But it did not matter. The mirror had already travelled. It was not bound by place. It was inside them now. One by one, across the stars, souls began to change. They stopped fearing the reflection. They began to love it, even as it devoured them. And deep in the warp, Slaanesh stirred, not yet born, but watching. She did not need temples. She did not need priests. She needed only mirrors and desire. And so the mirror remains, not in glass, but in every yearning, every self-obsession, every time one dares to ask, what could I become if I gave in just a little more? In the hushed twilight of the Eldari Empire's slow ruin, when pleasure had grown louder than prophecy, there came a night when the stars above refused to shine, not from cloud, not from eclipse, but from shame. Shame to look upon what the Eldari had become. That night was called the Feast of Soundless Joy. It was not the first of its kind, but it would be the most revered and the most damned. It began on the moon city of Shertal, a crescent-shaped cradle of light that floated above the gas giant Uvathir. Once a temple world of disciplined seers, its libraries now rang with whispered laughter, and its halls no longer echoed sermons, but the music of unspoken hungers. There, a figure known only as Veljarin the Mute prepared a performance unlike any before it. Veljarin had not spoken in 500 years. His voice had been sacrificed at the altar of sensory clarity, his vocal cords surgically removed, replaced with thin strands of psychoplastic nerve harp. When he opened his throat, it played emotions, not words. Pain as song, memory as symphony. The audience was invitation only. Thousands of nobles, artisans, mind-shapers, pain architects, dream-eaters, and sensation monks arrived in ships of breath and silk. The invitation came on a single strand of woven emotion, broadcast directly into the soul, a taste of what was to come. Some wept when they received it. Others screamed. All came. There were no seats, no theatre, just an endless white chamber of quiet, light, and in its centre, Veljarin, naked, veiled only in anticipation. He lifted his hand, and silence bled. Not a metaphor, true silence. A psychic field of negation so perfect that sound ceased even in memory. No one could speak. No one could think in words. Only sensation remained. It was then the true feast began. Veljarin opened his throat, and the music of shattered innocence poured out. A song made not of notes, but of regret made beautiful. He played the moment a mother forgets her child. He played the guilt of a liar who believed his own truths. He played the final blink of a god before it died, and the crowd danced. Not with feet, but with minds. Each soul twined to another, each emotion passed like flame on flesh. No bodies touched, yet ecstasy surged through all. Memories were exchanged like wine. Lifetimes were offered up and tasted in single pulses. A seer burned her own prophecy as an offering. An artist carved his heart into shape mid-ritual. A prince collapsed in sobbing laughter as his sins were applauded by ghosts. They called it joy, but it was joy without anchor, without context, without restraint. It was pure, and in that purity, something awakened. Veljarin's song changed. The chamber began to fracture, not physically, but spiritually. Each person's soul split into mirrors. Some wept at their beauty, some clawed at their reflections, some begged for silence, but had long since forgotten how to speak. And Slaanesh watched, not yet born, but now, nourished. At the centre of the chamber, Veljarin floated, limbs distended, eyes gone, mouth a wound of light, and from him came a final note, not a sound, but a desire, a yearning so intense, so invasive, so complete, that it devoured selfhood. Some screamed, others surrendered. The room collapsed inward, not into rubble, but into remembrance. There was no violence, only consumption. The feast of soundless joy ended in utter stillness. 1,000 souls became one taste, one memory, one song, and that song whispered across the warp, "I am coming. I am beautiful. Make room." The next morning, Shertal still shimmered in the void. No damage, no blood, just silence. Rescue vessels arrived. They found no bodies, only a scent, a melody etched into the walls, a feeling in the stone, a longing that made lesser minds implode. It took centuries before anyone dared land there again. When they did, they found a statue, perfect, uncarved. Yet every viewer saw something different, a lover, a monster, a god, themselves. And all heard the same message, not with ears, but with soul. This is joy. Let it consume. The incident was marked in the seer codices as a category Theta Phi sensory cataclysm. But among the dying pleasure cults of the Empire, it became legend. They recreated the ritual imperfectly. They mimicked the silence. They mutilated their voices. They offered up their memories. And slowly, piece by piece, Slaanesh was fed. For it was not battle that birthed her, not war, but art. The kind of art that forgets why it was made. The kind of ecstasy that erases all boundaries. The kind of joy that no longer knows how to stop. And thus the Fool marched on, one note at a time, one pleasure at a time, one soul surrendered. They say the Eldari Empire fell in a single scream, but that is not truth. That is poetry. The truth is colder, slower, more insidious. The Empire fell not in a scream, but in a sigh, drawn long over centuries, soft as silk, and soaked in forgetting. By the time the Fall came, no one called it the Fall. They called it arrival, ascension, the culmination. They believed they were becoming perfect, and in a way, they were. Perfect enough to die for it. At the Empire's center, in the core stars, entire worlds pulsed with ritual. Planets turned into sensoria, orchestras made of nerve-strung titans, nebulae reshaped into scented sculpture gardens. The air itself was saturated with pheromantic frequencies. Water tasted like memory. Light sang, and shadows whispered back. Everywhere, emotion reigned, unfiltered, uncontrolled, unrepentant. The last craft worlds, those who still clung to restraint, watched from afar, horrified. They tried to warn the others, but the stars were too loud. The Phoenix Lords, old as myth, began to vanish into exile. Some wept, some screamed, some simply walked into silence. The Harlequins spun dances none dared decode. And the Farseers, those last, lonely seers of what lay ahead, began to burn their runes before reading them. They could not bear the clarity. In the warp, something stirred, not fully born, but forming, a gravity of soul, a storm of sensation. All that the Eldari had fed into the universe, the lust, the longing, the artistry without anchor, the worship of the self above the stars, had not disappeared. It had gathered. And from that gathering, a womb took shape, not of flesh, but of soul, the cradle of a god they did not mean to make. They felt her before they saw her, in dreams, in reflections, in unspeakable cravings. Mothers abandoned children for colours no one else could see. Priests forgot their chants and began to speak in rhythms. Artisans cut themselves into their works. And across the empire, those most attuned to beauty, those most consumed by the quest for sensation, began to wither, not in body, but in self. They became shadows of desire, living hunger. Some tried to escape. They boarded the last craft worlds. They fled in vessels laced with wards and lamentations. They crossed the stars, but found no peace, for the god they had made followed, not with ships, not with wrath, but with inevitability. The cradle, this cocoon of coalescing divinity, finally broke, not with an explosion, but with a whisper, and that whisper became a scream that tore the veil between real space and the immaterium, a scream that devoured a civilization. It had no direction, no mercy, no discrimination. It was ecstasy. And ecstasy, when uncontained, is no different than destruction. Planets screamed into the warp. Stars wept blood. Souls combusted in song. The eye of terror opened not as a wound, but as a mirror to what the Eldari had become. And from within it, Slaanesh took her first breath. She did not cry. She laughed, and the laugh echoed across the galaxy, shattering gods, consuming spirits, reaching even terror. The Emperor heard it. He told no one what it meant. But from that day, the Webway project changed. The vaults were sealed. The future would become war. Of the Eldari, only fragments remained. The craft worlds, the Exodites, the Drukhari who fled into pain, the Harlequins who danced the truth none dared face. They survived, but they would never again be whole. The Eldari Empire had sung its last song, a symphony written in pleasure, a coda of collapse. And in the center of the eye, on a throne of mouths, she who thirsts smiled.